So it's with my great pleasure that I invite Denise onto the program. I haven't seen Denise for quite a while, but I sent a little blurb about Denise and everyone was laughing because I I put fearless, courageous and radically unique, and they were all laughing about the radically unique, but everyone agreed with me. So this topic, the real me, I'm just thinking, wow, if we're going to be uncovered the real me, what have we been? How have we been seeing ourselves? It must be the false me. So if there's anyone who can uncover yourself to yourself, it's Sister Denise. There you go.
Hello. Well, this is a very deep subject, the real me, or soul consciousness. And when we learn about Raj Yoga, we learn in a way from the outside. We learn some concepts and we think about it. We cogitate, we ruminate, we practice, we imagine, and we wonder what really meditation is. And so I think everyone who has joined this evening has been through the initial 7 days or 7 sessions or 10 sessions or however many sessions it is of the course. And so you know that you are a soul, but when you say that, I am a soul, the way our language is arranged and the way we use language, we think of a soul as an object. And it's quite a trick to shift that perception of the soul as an object to the soul as me. Because we say a soul or we say it, and we have an image of a soul as a point of light, and that is somehow something not me, even though we say it's me, but in terms of how our consciousness processes it, we intellectualize it, we say, yeah, okay, I'm a soul, but it takes a while to really become a soul. And we have to think about this idea like there's never been a time ever when I have not existed as my individual self. And the real me then is not your mask. Your face is a mask. And I'm in Germany, I'm speaking to you from Germany, and in television and film, the makeup people are called the people who make the mask. And so they make up your face, but they call it a mask, and your face is already a mask. And when you get born, you have a little baby's face, and it gradually grows into your adult face, which then eventually becomes your old and wrinkled and sagging face, and then you die, and you might get a death mask. A few people get that. But that's not you. And then we have other layers of that mask, which has to do with the persona, it has to do with the sense of self, and we think of the self in terms of our position, the kind of respect people should have for us because of who we are, and we create a description of who we are, and that has to do with our accomplishments. And the real me is someone who achieves accomplishments, but the accomplishments are not the self. They're just things you did, so really to reach the real me involves quite a lot of shedding of different layers of ways in which I have thought about me, and also ways in which the world has reflected me back to myself. And, everyone, as they grow up, they're told by their parents and other family members about themselves. You are this, you belong to this class, you belong to this race, you belong to this culture, you belong to this country, and all your values are connected with that. And so gradually you're told who you are, and some of it you will take on board, some of it you will say, no, I'm not really that. And when somebody starts studying about spirituality, and especially about Raj Yoga, it presumes that there has been a quest, and that quest is to find the self. So the real me is that self that we wish to find, but it's not so easy to find the self. I mean, if you go to the theoretical concept of a soul, and we learn that a soul is such a little point of light that has a mind and intellect and some sanskaras, but that's still, you have a picture of it. It's still an objectification of the self. And this thing which we call body consciousness is all about the objectification of the self. You can say, I am not my body, but then you will still feel that you are something that is quite similar to your body, even though it's much more subtle. But to get to the actual self, the real self, it's a journey, it's a big journey, because there are so many attributes of false consciousness that you have to get past and get through in order to arrive at the self. And we hear that the self, the essential qualities of the self, purity, peace, power, love, bliss. So you think about that, okay? I am a being of light, a point of light, which thinks and feels through the body, which perceives the material world through the sense perceptions. And in fact, you begin to realize that all experiences occur in the mind and not in the material world that we are participating in. So there's an enormous amount of shifting that has to take place in order to grasp this, because the self is very, very subtle. And then why we learn about the self is because we want to meditate. Meditation means we want to have yoga, that is contact with the self. First of all, I must make contact with myself, and then secondly, make contact with God, you see, who is also a self, but a different type of self from a human self. God is not a human. We are human souls. And a human soul is someone who has a human experience through a human body. And that experience is taking place in the soul, taking place in the mind, getting processed by the intelligence. And, nowadays there are films about artificial intelligence and about what it might be to be someone who doesn't have a body. And now that we are using internet technology so much and artificial intelligence is so much part of our lives, and even now in this, I don't know, we want to call it a broadcast or something like that, a Zoomcast, but you're seeing a picture of me, and I'm not even seeing you. I'm talking to you knowing that you're there, but I'm not seeing any of you. So that means that in my mind I have to travel to somewhere in England, many places in England where many of you are, and I have to assume that you're hearing me because of having faith in technology, and that the way in which we respond to each other lets us know, yeah, the communication is taking place. And then all of us are in the lockdown, so it means that a lot of us are spending a lot more time with ourselves. And one problem that happens when you are just by yourself and you are not experiencing yourself being reflected through other people, or maybe you'll see your face in the mirror and that will be some kind of a reflection, but mostly in human interaction there's a great deal of reflection from other people. And in Raj Yoga we're wanting to capture myself, reflecting myself to myself independently of the material world. And that's a very subtle thing. And also it can make a person feel very disconnected. So I think very important is to ask ourselves, why would we want to understand the self when it takes us so far away from the way the world has reflected us back to ourselves? One thing that we also see is in the reflection that the world gives back to us is in religion. Religion will tell you you are a male or you are a female. It won't tell you that you're a soul who is genderless. And so in that respect, we find that there's quite a big difference between spirituality and religion. Religion and the way the world looks at us work together, they dovetail together. So in that sense, religion is quite materialistic or material conscious, because the religion will say you are your body, even though it says there is a soul, but it's more like it says you have a soul. But in spirituality, no, I have a body, but I'm not this body. So what am I? It's quite hard for a person to go around being normal in the regular world, being aware of the self as not being the body, because it kind of puts you into a non-normal frame of mind. But yet spirituality has nothing to do with not being normal, but it has everything to do with being subtle and going deeper into this why. Is it useful for me to know myself as not this body? I think one very important reason is because most people, they're afraid of death, because they think that when they die, then they will stop existing. And the feeling inside the soul of no longer existing is really abhorrent, because it's the nature of the soul to exist for all time. And so one level of soul consciousness, an important level of soul consciousness, is to really realize that I will never die, and nobody else will ever die. We will lose our bodies. Other people who are our relatives and friends, they leave their bodies, but the soul continues, that self continues, that individual person continues. So what is it about me that will continue beyond my body? So one thing you can say is your consciousness will continue. Your consciousness, that means your sense of self, your awareness of yourself as a thinking, feeling, conscious being. And we have to think of ourselves as ageless. We can't say the soul is young if the body is young, or old if the body is old. We do talk about an old soul or a new soul, and by that we don't really mean anything to do with the body, but by that we mean there are some people who feel that they've been around for a very long time. And when you have studied the course in Raj Yoga, you've studied also the idea of reincarnation. And so knowing the self as a soul, that means knowing that I reincarnate, and I have reincarnated many times. I have played different roles. So the role I'm playing now through this body is one of them. And I have had as many female bodies as I have male bodies. So I know exactly how to be a male, and I know exactly how to be a female, because I have experience in both. Because the soul is genderless. And the ideal of a spiritual practice is, in fact, to bring about a perfect balance of masculinity and femininity in the self, so that you're androgynous. Whatever your body is, whatever the gender of your body is, obviously according to your role, you have to play according to that. But it doesn't mean that you have to be limited by that and say to yourself, I am a woman, therefore. Or listen to somebody else saying to you, you are a woman, therefore. There's no therefore about it, you see. But the culture and the value system and the way people think about it, they're not able to think about it. They can't think of you as genderless. Even to think of yourself as genderless is a trick. So you have to think about it for quite a long time. We are definitely influenced by the body that we get. And so we will accentuate the feminine aspects if you're in a female body, and we'll accentuate the masculine aspects if you're in a male body. But the culture forces people to be exclusively one thing or exclusively the other thing, otherwise you're not considered normal. And spirituality will say, no, you have both in you. You have many things in you. And when we think about reincarnation, it means that, okay, I have been present for a great deal of recorded history. And in England, the recorded history goes back about 600 years before Christ. That's about the beginning of recorded history in England. And so maybe you were there, but maybe you were in other places, you see. And because you are in England now, doesn't mean you're always in England. So it means that the race of the body that you have can easily be just a temporary thing, but you could just as easily have been in a multitude of different races. You can have been Chinese, you can have been African, you can have been Indian, you can have been different kinds of Europeans, different kinds of Asians. And there are people who have done studies with DNA, and they have found that a lot of people have DNA which defines them as containing the genes of many different races, and that's on a physical level. But here we're talking spiritually, that I am not my race. And so if we are race prejudiced and say, I don't like anyone who's not my type, it's very shallow, you see. So the usefulness of soul consciousness and knowing the real me and knowing that, I'm a human being, and I can easily have been in all the races and in all the religions and any gender. So the real me is not to do with these physical considerations, even cultural considerations, still external. The internal is much more deep, much more subtle than that. And so as we spend time meditating, you think, okay, I am a human spirit and I am essentially pure, peaceful, powerful, loving, blissful. And from that space, I come into action through the body, I come into interaction through my body, and I have to practice seeing the other people who I'm interacting with. They are also like me souls. They may or may not know it, they may or may not believe it or think about it, they may think of themselves as entirely according to the how their body presents itself to them. And they will say, I am my body, I am my race, I am my religion, I am my social class, I am my economic bracket, I am my academic background, I am my job, I am my family, all this. But as you think about it and you go deeper and deeper inside, you realize that these are layers, you see, and they're valid and they're real. But behind that reality, there is something you might want to say more real in the sense of it's more enduring, it's more unchanging. We are people who go through enormous numbers of changes, and the world is always changing all around us. Circumstances are always changing, but I am still me. And what happens is sometimes you lose your sense of self because, people will say things to you and you will buy into that, and it will create some degree of confusion, or it may disempower you. Very often people will say things to each other for the purpose of disempowering them, because the way the world is structured is very much power struggle, the dominant one or the dominated ones. And spirituality teaches us that, these positions, you could be in a dominant position, but you may not be a dominant being. You may not be a person of substance, because there is a variation among souls. I spoke a moment ago about an old soul or a new soul. So an old soul is someone who's been around a long time, accumulated a lot of experience, which has gone into the subconscious. You've performed a lot of karma, good karma, bad karma, neutral karma, all sorts of karma, and there are consequences of karma. And so every so often something will happen to you, someone will behave in a very improper way towards you, and then you will say, why? What is this? And spirituality will say, well, it's karma. You did something to this person and you're getting the consequences of it, so get through it and move on. So getting through it is a very important aspect, because when something that we perceive as negative is happening and we interpret that as some sort of settlement of karma, it means that we will not allow ourselves to be limited by it, to be disturbed by it, but we will use our meditation to accumulate inner power that allows us to get through it without getting undone by it, without getting diminished by it, without getting into negative interaction with the other person. But get through it means that we can process it and neutralize it and move on, because we do not need to be limited by anything. So all this means we start thinking about ourselves with quite a lot of question marks, really, like, who am I really? What really makes me tick? And one thing that you can look at is your own personal ethical policy. This is a very good indicator that lets you know, well, who am I? Am I a person who has love for humanity, for example? Do you have love for humanity? If you have love for humanity, that's a sign of a high caliber soul. And if you have love for humanity, it means also you need a lot of power, because you need a lot of power to love those who may not be behaving in a very lovable manner. And love doesn't mean being lovey-dovey or anything like that. Love means that you are favorably disposed towards that person's benefit. But in that sense, love is not really an emotion, but more an attitude, a position that you take, that you will not harm a person, or you will not participate in harming a person. It's a love for humanity. Do you have love for yourself? Do you respect yourself? Do you recognize yourself? Well, of course, the first answer is, well, no, probably not. Are you a perfectionist? What's the meaning of that? Are you easily swayed, easily influenced? Do you get angry easily? Do you get upset easily? Do you get jealous? These are all different emotions that we would call as negative emotions. But when you really know the self really deeply, and you experience the self, which is an amazing thing, to experience the self, that I am this extraordinary being and I would not have it any other way, and to then hold yourself stable and steady in that is really a very important goal. To reach that goal, we have to go through lots of different steps, and we have to spend time thinking about it. What about this? What about that? So the knowledge we study gives us doorways into big landscapes of areas to think about, to ponder upon. And so slowly, let it take as long as it takes. You slowly recognize yourself and who you are and what's your value, and how the world doesn't always reflect you as you are, and when you notice that, then you don't buy into it. So this is something that I wanted to share with you. Of course, it's really, the information is so big and we could talk about it for so many hours, but we've reached just about the time when I need to wrap it up. But just to remind you that you are this being of light, genderless, raceless, colorless, cultureless. You perceive everything through the body, but you experience everything in the mind. There is no way you can ever stop existing. You are forever. You have always ever been there. And you are in the process of discovering the essence of your being, which is very subtle, very deep, and very wonderful. And another very important thing to be aware of is to be neutral about what is perceived as good and bad, because goodness and badness is very much depending on people's mentalities and attitudes. But when you're really a soul, you are in many ways independent of good and bad. There is the light and the dark. It is there in everyone and everything. There is heaven and hell. And we have to be able to manage the light and the dark, the up and the down, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, and still remain true to ourselves and still remain connected with ourselves. This is the work, you can say. So thank you very much. Om Shanti.
Yes, so this is a chance for anyone to ask some questions. There is some questions. I'm not sure if I'm able to read it in the right way, but it says, when we take place in the womb, we are genderless.
When you come into the womb, the body, the fetus, has a possibility of going either way. But once the soul enters the fetus, which is in about the 4th month, then there is a decision as to which gender the body is, and that will be connected with your karma and connected with your destiny. And then you will grow in that gender within the womb, and you will emerge and they'll say it's a boy or it's a girl.
Another question is, in a situation where someone says something disempowering, are you then supposed to walk away?
Well, that's up to you. You know, you could challenge them, but you don't want to get into a knockdown, drag-out fight, you know, because the people don't really like conflict. And I think you need to be very good at dealing with that, coming into interaction where you face the challenges without getting emotionally undone. You really have to overcome your fear, because there is a lot of fear involved, because you don't want to get into an argument that you might lose. If somebody says something disempowering and it affects you, then it means you can very easily get disempowered. And so that means that in a way they have let you know in not a very nice way that you're easily disempowered and you need to do something about that. Because the problem is not really what they did, but the problem is how it impacted you, and you need to really come into your power and be in your power to deal with it. And this is why the world is made up of sort of victims and predators, because people are either, actually the society tends to encourage the men to be more predators and the women to be more victims. And then you get some who don't go for that. It's very difficult to be able to come into a relationship where people are really, really equal and they deal with each other in that equality. That is quite a trick to achieve that.
It leads on to another question, which could be a whole topic in itself, really. Please, can you give your thoughts about ego? How to recognize it and deal with it? And then it's all, because people know that Baba has said as one of the last 3 words to become egoless.
Yeah, bodiless, egoless, viceless. Well, ego is a mask which you put on as a substitute for the real self, because you're not really in touch with the self. And so your ego is some sort of compensation, some mask that you put on which covers your weakness, or covers your shame, or covers your lack of sense of self, and then you operate in that mask. That is ego. But, there's a lot of different people who have a different concept of ego. And it's very important to distinguish between self-respect and false ego. And this word ego, I think, is not a good word to use. It's better to use the word real ego and false ego. Because ego means I. What is the real I and what is not the real I? And sometimes, if people are in their power, somebody will accuse them of being arrogant and egotistical, but actually they're not. They're in their power. And if you are not really sure about yourself, then these challenges to your self-respect can take you down, and they will accuse you of ego, but it will be a false accusation. So you need to be very clear about what is the real me, and be in your power, and be prepared to face challenges, because people don't like it when you're in your power, because it makes them feel disempowered, and they'd rather disempower you than feel disempowered themselves. It gets quite complicated human interaction around the topic of ego. It can be quite unpleasant.
Yeah. It's a big topic, ego. But here's a slant of ego. Someone is asking, because you mentioned perfectionism, what is the reason for perfectionism and how to resolve it?
Well, it seems to me that perfectionism has to do with some psychological aspects, and a perfectionist will be someone who is a number of things. One is that your standards are really, really high, and you are a great artist, and you have to be a perfectionist because of that. But most people are not that. That's pretty rare. Most people are, it's like a psychosis, it's a compensation for trouble, for some traumatic experience, and you kind of cover it by being a perfectionist, and that will give you trouble, and it will give other people trouble. And so in that case, you need to really look for optimum. Suppose you are writing a piece and you could improve it endlessly, but there comes a point where the law of diminishing returns sets in, and that is called the optimum. So I mean, mostly I would recommend that people try for the optimum. And if you try to go beyond the optimum, then you put in too much work and you get much less result, and it makes everybody crazy. And this is the kind of perfectionist that you want to stay away from. Someone like that, and stay away from being like that yourself. So the optimum is a really good thing to go for. And you know, in spirituality we talk about balance. So perfectionism is an extreme. Perfection is balance. And you might want to have everything balanced so accurately that someone else would say, oh, you know, that's too high standard for me, but that's your standards, you know. And if you want to be excellent, you know, then you need to have high standards. But the perfectionism is when you're being an extremist and it's not for any good purpose, you know.
And it's also when you project it onto others, isn't it? I mean, one is to have kind of standards for yourself, but sometimes when those are projected onto other people, then it becomes like a real problem.
Well, that's really abusive and invasive. So then the person who is having all that projected on them, they have to stand up for themselves, you know, because there's a lot of people who go for spirituality who are quite soft, quite gentle people, and then they need to learn to be strong and stand up for themselves and not take any nonsense.
Okay, there's some other questions, but these are quite big ones.
Okay.
Anyway, here's one. Could you share your efforts and inner work towards being in that state of balance and power? Could you share some, you know, maybe milestones that you, or even what you're doing now, to continue bring yourself into that place of balance but yet power?
Well, for me, everything is intuitive, and I sort of look at myself more as an artistic than a scientific type. And I will listen to my intuition about, you know, looking for what's right, you know, like, is the lighting right? You'll know if it's right in a photograph, or your amount of food and rest and time with people, time alone. Your conscience and your intuition have for me at least, a little instrument inside there which lets me know when it's right, and when it's not right, you feel it, and then you bring it back to it being right. And it's a constant thing. It's a little bit like tuning a violin. You play the violin and it goes out of tune, you have to keep on tuning it. In the same way, yoga is like tuning yourself all the time. When you're tuned to your soul consciousness, you're tuned to God, your intuition will really let you know what's right, and you will do that. And I give a lot of importance to the disciplines that we learn, because, if you're a musician, you need to have good technique. But if you don't have interpretative capacity, then your technique is not going to do you any good. So discipline in life is like technique, but then you also need the intuition and the that inner sense of what's right, and go with that. So you're really a leader of your own self.
probably the last question. There's been a few, but I'm just trying to get a sense. Some of them more similar. But someone's asking about being surrendered to God. Does being surrendered to God and His will conflict with us having dreams of life? I mean, is it that I'm trying to understand the question here a little bit, but it's saying can we have both? If we're surrendered to God, can we also live out our dreams? Yeah.
You have to really understand yourself. I wouldn't think about surrendering to God at all. I would think about trying to understand yourself. And there are a few people in this world who are mystics and who really want to be with God and make God the focus of their life. And then they do that, But if you think that you're supposed to do something and that it will cost you something, then I don't think I would go about it like that. I really wouldn't. I would say to yourself, what is God for me? Really ask yourself this question. And what do you want? Very, very difficult question. What do you want? And if you want to surrender to God, then you will. But if you're thinking surrendering to God is what you should do, but the cost of it is too high, then definitely don't surrender to God. That won't have any meaning for you. So be careful of the language here. Be careful of the wording. I mean, it's very important to take care of yourself spiritually, to look at your spiritual side of your life, and you have to create balance, because if you have dreams in your life, then, why would you not go for those dreams? What God tells us is that some dreams that you have are very temporary and short-lived, and that you will end up disappointed. And so God says, I am with you, I am there always, and if you want to take advantage of my presence in your life, then I can show you some ways to do that. And I can also show you the contrast between, dreams which are ephemeral, just here today and gone tomorrow, and something more permanent. Because I think what people ultimately want, and especially when you realize you're a soul, you want permanent things. And what you get from your interaction with God is something long-lasting, permanent. And if you think that you can be satisfied by falling in love with someone, or getting the latest, greatest, this or that, or getting a qualification so that you can be respected in the academic world or professionally, or you make £1 million or £1 billion, but it's limited, you see. And so you go for your dreams, but make sure that you're not shortchanging yourself, and really take a look at what you want and why you want it and what's important to you, and then focus on that.
I think that's a really lovely place to finish. And I wondered if you would take us into a meditation about the real me.
So, first of all, turn your attention within. Because the real me is very subtle. I am light. I am energy, consciousness. I'm soft and beautiful. I'm strong and indestructible. I have been gifted with many talents. I've been taught much wisdom. Which is seeping into my spirit. Let me go to the essence of me, my purity, my sweetness, my love, my beautiful heart, my gentleness, my clarity of understanding, my courage, and my readiness to stand up for what is really important and let go of what is not. I know my values. And I live by them. I balance the different sides of myself. Listening to the voice of intuition. Listening to the conscience. Following those signs. I am a heart of gold, generous and not stupid. I recognize who I am, and I go deep into that resonance that is me. A beautiful feeling. Mixed love and power, gentleness and strength. I will always be me, and I flex with circumstances. I stay true to myself. I am just light, pure consciousness. Still and steady. I am forever.
Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you very much, Sister Denise. The hour went very fast, and so many things were shared, and even just, you could just take one of those. It's almost like the meditation was kind of divine self-talk, and even just one thing, isn't it? I am forever. That could be a whole huge thing to understand or just contemplate on. So there's lots of thank yous coming in the chat. People appreciate the meditation. So yes, thank you. We waited, but it was worth the wait. Denise is in great demand all the time, all over the world. I think you pretty much stay in one place now, but you Zoom everywhere.
I do.
Ironic, isn't it? Thank you very much for joining us, and really appreciate it a lot.